Welcome to The Spiritual Psychologist. Today we have a juicy episode. I am talking to Amy, who is a somatic sexual healing coach, and she has expertise in tantric energy work and the sacred feminine arts. This is such a great conversation about boundaries, about sexuality, intimacy, shame, safety in spiritual spaces. I hope you find it so valuable and enjoy this amazing, evolving conversation that you're about to witness. Welcome, Amy, gorgeous Amy. So I would love to know a bit more about you and where your journey began.
Yeah, I mean, mine was birthed out of my spiritual journey. So I was on a spiritual path, been on a spiritual path sort of more intentionally since like 2010, 2011 maybe. So that's some time now, is it? Is that like over 10 years? Yeah, and then maybe a bit before that. And so I was learning to meditate and starting to get interested in yoga. I was interested in like Buddhism. And manifestation and reading things like The Secret and getting into crystals and really like being into Eastern philosophy. And at that time, particularly in my world, it wasn't like that cool, right? It was almost like, oh, it's people you didn't want to admit you were struggling back then, right? There was a lot of stigma around having hard times. So it was something I was doing undercover. But then there was a big catalyst in my life in 2016 when my mum passed away, and that kind of sent me on this trajectory. And I'd already sort of started training in I was a Reiki practitioner by that stage, and that kind of propelled me into a bit of a maybe like existential crisis, I suppose is the best way of describing it. Like really like, what is life? Where is she gone? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to die? Where is spirit and matter, and where's the defining line?
Oh, so you went pretty like deep into it.
Yeah, and so much so that I decided to go to India and learn more about their philosophy, right? Learn about more about Hindu philosophy and Eastern philosophy. And so I was in India, finding myself as one does, but feeling very, very lost. And I was almost towards the end of the journey. I was thinking I'm going to come back, but I was like, I don't feel complete here, but I don't know what to do. And my friend said, why don't you go and do a yoga teacher training? At least you can kind of like, I really loved doing like the pujas, and I really loved chanting, and I loved being immersed in their sort of spiritual culture. Anyway, I looked on the Yoga Alliance website, and there's all these sort of filters you can use. So the first school that came up in Rishikesh, because that's where I wanted to go, it was like, oh, it's got a swimming pool and air conditioning and all this wonderful stuff, and it starts on Monday. And I was just like, oh, shiny things, this sounds right up my street. But like being immersed in the spiritual culture and things like that. And so I was like, this sounds great. I messaged them. They were like, we've only got a deluxe room available. I was like, do you know what? Take the last of my savings. I'm coming to Rishikesh. And anyway,
I love it.
Long story short, I got there and it was a Kundalini Tantra yoga teacher training. I never knew that that's what I signed up to. So I kind of walked, and it's a completely different thing. I thought I was just going to like brush up on my down dog, maybe get my alignment. And it was like, no, you're about to have a massive Kundalini awakening.
Wow.
And that's what happened. And with my Kundalini awakening, I had a huge awakening of sexual energy. The teacher training that I was doing was not teaching us to work with sexual energy. It's called white tantra. So it was Kundalini. And some of the practices were to awaken our sexual energy and clear the sacral, but we weren't like, it's not like that tantra where we're like in, the red tantra where they're really talking about sex and sexual energy and intimacy. It wasn't like that, but I had this huge awakening of sexual energy. And then I suppose in that context, I didn't know what to do with it because we weren't.
What did it look like? What did it look and feel like?
Being really, really, really turned on. the whole time.
It's all the time.
Yeah, towards the end of the training, and being like just like cracked open, just turned on, alive, like amazing, right? And I mean, all I wanted to do was go back to my room and like get into bed and masturbate, right? And when I did that though as well, I was like, because I was feeling like, wow, I'm so turned on, I must just, you know, probably just going to touch myself and just fireworks are going to go off. But that didn't happen. I noticed it's almost like this magnifying glass came down on me, and it was like, oh, I'm holding my breath, I'm very tense, like all these things are happening in my body when I would actually go to be intimate with myself and go to self-pleasure. And then this just sort of sparked this journey, because then I came back to the UK, and you know, I wasn't really in an environment where I'm at the bottom of the Himalayas in the Ganga River, you know, like feeling all this energy flowing through me. And I just sort of, you know, went, and I remember sort of like getting entangled in like chasing this unavailable man. And I was sort of like, I kind of need to just roll this back and look after this energy for myself, work out how to use it. So then I started, so I embarked on a period of conscious celibacy. And I decided on 9 months, because I read somewhere that 9 months was the amount of time it takes to have a baby. So it's like the rebirth time. So I was like, that sounds great. I'll do 9 months. And then it was involuntarily 12 months, just because there was not really anyone available. But that was really magical as well, because it's almost 12 months to the day that I met what became my first sort of tantric partner, who taught me how to use this energy during lovemaking, which was just massively expansive as well. And then so I'm working with this big energy in my body, and very new to it, right? When you start to get into that world, you realize it's people that are like doing that energy work for years upon years, right? And you know, along the way, you know, in hindsight, was really quite vulnerable, you know, in all these sort of high sexual spaces, because I had a lot of sexual trauma in my past. And I wasn't really marrying the two up until I went so fully into like this sort of tantric and sacred sexuality communities and this big energy work, and you know, look, just you know, sex and relating at the forefront, and that I kind of just had a bit of a nervous system overload. And that kind of led me to look at more trauma work, and like what is and attachment styles and developmental trauma.
Because I think there's the assumption that in spiritual spaces you're safe. Do you know what I mean? Like you are safe, but there's a lot of sexual energy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because people are so open.
Yeah.
People are more open than the, like, if you're going into a bar or if you're going into the library or whatever, the energy is totally different to if you're walking into a spiritual space and community where people are more connected to their hearts generally, aren't they? They're more open in terms of their energy, but that can also feel quite unsafe actually if you're holding that sexual trauma, you know, or other kinds of trauma, because it's like people can be a little bit crossing your boundaries actually. That's what I've noticed, just in terms of things like touch and hugging, and it's really beautiful, but it's also like there's an energy there.
Yeah. And you know, actually I find those spaces some of the most unsafe spaces, and spiritual spaces, like there's so much unchecked ego. You know, and even when we're talking about boundaries, there is such a there's a you know, because we can speak about boundaries and the way we and what we say, but there's this real undercurrent that's happening in every interaction of power dynamics, of you know, projections, you know, of like that feminine energy, which is this unspoken kind of like we can't even explain it, but there's something going on, right? I've just seen a lot of manipulation in those spaces, and a lot of like hierarchy, like power over, and it being not really acknowledged and spoken to, and how you and in the sense as well, because people who go into those spaces are inherently vulnerable. We
Yes.
end up
Yeah.
seeking these spiritual spaces because we're vulnerable.
Yeah. And there's that thing of like just cracking people open, right? It's like just open yourselves completely to that, to opening up your energy, right?
Yeah,
Opening up your energy centers, and then it's like, and then kind of like, okay, go off now
yeah,
and get on with life. And then you're sitting with this thing of like, what the
yeah,
how do I integrate this
yeah,
into actual life?
yeah. And there's so much wrapped into these things, so I'm just going to tap on it lightly. But
Yeah.
the reason I've started training people to become practitioners in female sexuality and what I've learned is because, like, primarily my former teachers, more than one, at least three, have been male in my
Mm.
significant, within the big significant schools that I've trained with, and they've all been accused of sexual misconduct.
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
there's something that's happening there,
Yeah.
like you can't, I always say, like, if there's multiple people saying something's happening,
Yes.
you, regardless if you think it didn't, you have to look and sit back and be like, why
Yeah.
why is this not happening, not just once but multiple times, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I lean on the I can definitely see in all these cases how that could have happened,
Mm.
because of the culture that I witnessed. um,
Mm.
but you're working with people that are just cracked open,
Yeah.
and if and then saying you should hold your boundaries, and it's like, we
Mm.
don't even know how to speak our boundaries clearly and precisely and on point
Yes.
and in the moment at the
Yeah.
best of times, let alone when we're in an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah. And
Yet with
there's
these
that.
people that we perceive as powerful and who have activated that for us, and all these sorts of things that feed into it.
Yeah. And there's like, this is where I guess, like, in terms of my work as well, it's like, I love spirituality. I love spiritual spaces. Um, but I also know the lack of boundaries that can be there from space holders,
Yeah,
and how it can merge where actually it's a total lack of responsibility. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? And because these spaces aren't, I guess, like, monitored,
yeah, not
like,
regularly.
if, as a psychologist, right, if certain boundaries are crossed, then that's a significant, there's a significant consequence to that.
Yeah,
And I
totally.
and I don't mean like leading or living from a place of fear at all, but there's that bit around, like, if you've got anybody that's in that space of leading a space like that, there has to be a really solid boundaries and self-awareness and
Yeah,
space for that person to also go to for them to share what's coming up for them. There needs to
yeah,
be like a whole structure and system, doesn't there?
yeah,
So it's really
totally.
interesting, yeah, what you're
Yeah,
sharing.
yeah.
Mm.
And a level of accountability, I suppose, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Willingness, because and when you're speaking, I can imagine that you've come across this as well, but some of the kind of like higher, and I'm doing quotation marks, like higher spiritual teachings actually lend to avoiding responsibility and accountability. They
Mm.
can be utilized to be like, everything that you're experiencing is just a projection of your reality.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
didn't actually do that. It's just a projection of your reality.
Yeah, it's
And I actually,
gaslighting.
yeah, yeah. And I come from a criminal justice background. So prior to
Mm.
this, I worked as a probation officer. I worked in with those who have committed crimes. And so it's like I come from a very clear point of like harm and reparation and
Mm.
rehabilitation, and
Mm.
like understanding that rather than, oh, it was just, you know, their perception and your perception. It's like, no, very real things happen. And,
Yes.
you know, we need accountability and justice processes. And yet I can do that and look at that without, you're bad and you're good, and this kind of like binary, you know, but you kind of
Yes.
look at behaviors and harm and say, you know, this harm is being harm is happening, and this is the accountability goes this way, and how do we address that?
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
So, yeah, so interesting. We kind of went right off the
Yeah.
rail, like track a bit, but yeah, I think as well as like, you know, if you're new to the journey, that like you can really hold people as like up there on a pedestal, and you just take everything that they say for word. This is women and men, right?
Totally.
That you just can't create that separation and just follow along with what somebody is saying without bringing in that critical lens,
Yeah.
you know. So
Yeah, I absolutely did that because, you know,
I've
I
done it too.
yeah, I was
Mm.
totally new to the space. I already have a bit of a thing where I trust authorities, you know, like
Mm.
just as a default.
Mhm.
Um, and you know, there's a belonging that comes from these big schools and groups of people that I
Yes.
was looking for. Just lost my mind,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah,
There was just this
absolutely.
desperation to be part of something.
Yeah. So how has that kind of carved, yeah, into
Mm.
what you the spaces that you offer now?
Yeah, so I guess that then spurred some of my interest in like sexuality, then just was sparked by all this. So I just went sort of deep in this sort of tantra space. um but then, yeah, my own experience of my own nervous system just feeling deeply dysregulated,
Mm-hmm.
and all this energy coming up and it not always feeling good, right? Sometimes big energetic experiences and it not
Mm-hmm.
being a pleasurable experience, being
You
feeling.
mean sexual energy? Or do
Yeah,
you mean
I'd say like Kundalini energy, so a
mm-hmm.
lot of energy moving through my body and like
Yes.
physically in the moment in practices and things.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of things started coming up about things that happened in the past, that I wasn't that I would never have described as trauma, which is bonkers now. It's
Mm-hmm.
really bonkers. And I only laugh because it's like, and I kind of laugh and I share that in a sense that because I would really, really understand how a lot of people, I mean, I even hear it, people like, I've never experienced sexual trauma. I
Yeah.
just one time so and so and so and so and so and so, and you're like, oh, that's
What
really
kind of,
traumatic.
yeah, I'd love to kind of talk about that a little bit more, like without freaking everybody out. And not necessarily going into your experiences either, but if you're not wanting to go there, but like what kind of things can you give examples
Yeah,
of
sure.
the kind of things that we might just bypass in terms of that whole idea of like what sexual trauma looks like?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, being intimately touched when you, without consent, when you know, and what I mean by, you know, the amount of people that I know that have been groped or grabbed or
Yeah.
harassed on the street,
Mm.
right? And how that can cause this relationship with ourselves and our body as like it doesn't belong to us, right? And it's not safe. It's not that safe to be in our body.
Yes.
It's not that safe to be sexual, you
Mm.
know. Other times, I know there's plenty of women who have almost, well, not almost, but they've said in some way no, and
Mm.
that no has been sort of cajoled, coerced, overridden,
Yes.
in the moment, been too drunk, too not conscious enough to consent, and it
Mm.
happened, and being slut shamed by partners,
Mm.
by people that they're being intimate with. That's another one as well,
Yes.
kind of
Yeah.
emotion, like being almost being a sexual being derogatory, right? So
Yes.
slut
Yeah.
shaming is like, if you're a sexual being, it's you're less than, you're not worthy, right?
Mm.
So all these can really embed in the system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, mine even went a bit deeper, but yeah, it's not necessarily for this podcast, but um yeah, things that I kind of overlooked and thought, um yeah, you just brush them off in that moment.
Yes.
Actually,
Yeah.
I internalized a lot of them as my fault. And
Mm.
that's another common thing that I see.
Mm-hmm.
So I internalized a lot of it. Why was I there?
Oh
Why did I
yeah.
put myself in that position? And that's the
Mm.
trauma. That's deep shame. That's
Yes.
I'm wrong.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
wrong.
It's so interesting. Like, I went to Morocco in March, and on the last day, um, I was getting a taxi back to the airport. So I got in the taxi and I was sitting at the back and I couldn't get the seatbelt on. And he was talking to me, the guy, the taxi guy, well, we're just chatting and having a nice chat as well. And he said, "Oh, come and sit at the front." So I came and went and sat at the front, and we were talking and laughing. And then he kept putting his hand and rubbing my leg, and it was so interesting what came up, because that I knew I like, in terms of safety, I felt like, okay, I don't feel consciously unsafe,
Yeah.
and I don't feel like he's gonna do anything. And I know we're going to the airport, kind of thing. But when I got out and then processed it, he was in my dreams. I
Mm.
had like this that that ingrained thing of, why did I get in the front?
Mm.
You
Yeah.
know? And was I being too chatty? Was
Mm.
I being too, this part of me that's like naturally um just chatty, like you could call it flirty. Like, I could be talking now and people could perceive that as like flirty or fun or whatever, right? And it made me question that part of me where I was like, where it's come up actually before, where I've been like, okay, have I given a message? Or so I can see exactly what you're saying there around that piece around, you question yourself
Yeah.
and you think, okay, maybe I was really silly for getting in front of going
Mm.
into that front seat.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
start questioning everything, about yourself, because of that conditioned,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
mean, it is, because it is conditioned. It's, at the sort of top end of the scale, it's victim blaming, isn't it? It's that,
Yes,
why did you wear
exactly.
that skirt if you didn't want to get raped, right? And that's the kind of like
Yeah.
mentality that we can even see happening in the courts. As I said, coming from a criminal justice background, and I'm just sorry that happened to you, because what I hear you, that you didn't feel unsafe in that moment, but I also hear like there's an
Oh
unsafety in the
yeah, there
nervous
was.
system unsafety. And,
Yes. Yeah.
I really go by this notion of like, we deserve to not be touched at
Mm.
all by anyone unless we've agreed and there's been some agreement in it, right?
Yes.
And that can feel really extreme to people. They're like, God, but especially when we had that no touch over lockdown, and we realize how
Mm.
much we want human touch, but boundaries don't keep out connection, they invite in human connection. But
Yes.
people get touched out, for example, just by being in a lot of close contact. But also, if we've had these experiences where it's almost like our body hasn't ever felt like it belonged to us, like we never had a choice. And a lot of people have that just growing up, because that's in
Mm.
our culture. Like, they'll say, oh, go and give your uncle a hug, it's rude not to. I'll
Oh
give
yeah.
grandma a kiss, like forcing
Yes.
children into touch when they're like, I'm okay, I don't want to be touched, right?
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so we're kind of in this space where it's like our bodies become a little bit numb and frozen, because we're just kind of used to having to do things, have physical touch that we don't want. That
Yes.
actually running by this rule of nobody deserves, like everybody deserves to not be touched unless
Mm.
they consent to it. So
Yes.
we're not entitled to touch anyone unless
Mm.
there's consent. And even sometimes I'll ask my friends, like when I meet them, Do you want a hug? Because I even know, say I've just been traveling far and, like I get into somewhere and there's multiple people, like I don't
Yes.
necessarily want to hug everyone right there and then. I want to put my
Yeah.
bags down and take a breather and have a glass of water and come back to myself, then reach in for a hug. But then we've got all these norms that just say your body's not really yours. You just have to follow all these
Yes.
socially acceptable cues
Yeah.
that again just create this disconnection to our relationship to our body, which in turn is a disconnection to our relationship to sex and pleasure.
Yes. I think like the thing that really struck me when you were saying, when you were just talking about that was um, long-term relationships and marriage, and how there can be like just this expectation that you deliver, and that if you're not delivering, there's something wrong. So then there's like this diet, there's a general cultural dialogue, isn't there? If you're not being intimate, there's something wrong. And then you can then walk around holding this shame of, okay, I'm not feeling it at the moment, or I'm just doing it because, I feel like I need to meet my partner's needs. And therefore, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
I'm not in my feminine enough.
Yeah, I have to just laugh because I just know that those teachings they just get so distorted and wrapped up in ego constructs, right?
I mean, there's probably some like there's probably some truth to that. Like I know with myself that when I'm really in my masculine, when I'm in that like really really doing energy, like I find it's difficult to then step into that space of like relaxation, of receiving, of surrender, all of those things. But there can, I think for a lot of people it can bring up again a lot of shame.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what, you're right. And you, of course, of course I believe that you're right, because otherwise I'd have no job, right? So I do believe that we can create there's ways of like getting ourselves in the mood and getting ourselves more in touch with that sort of feminine energy side of things, and pleasure and softness and all those things that can lean into a sensual and intimate relationship. And I think what's important is for us to just take these things as like tools and not the rules. So, like,
Yes.
nobody's going to be, and I've spoken about this. There was a point when it felt really big on socials where it was like, be this sort of like orgasmic, juiced up woman. And it's like, nobody's like that all the time.
Yeah.
Like, we've got lives to lead. Like we've got other things to do. And nobody, necessarily, we don't want to be there all the time. Sometimes, personally for me, like I love being in my masculine. I love getting shit done. I love it when I'm in flow that
Yes.
way. I love it like I'm ticking things off. I'm building a business. I'm like, yes, I'm decorating my flat. I've got things in, I love being in that space. So, that there's not a hierarchy of these things, which I think we can sometimes perceive them as being like one's better than the other, or one challenges what it means to be me, as a woman in a woman's body type of thing. But taking these things as just ways to kind of explore different parts of ourselves,
Yes.
rather than like seeing it as a attack on ourselves as a whole.
Yeah.
I think is the best way to do it. Like if any of these approaches and teachings become a stick to beat ourselves over the head or the back,
Because it really can become like, it's another part of myself I haven't healed.
yeah.
It's another part of myself that like I'm totally disconnected with, or whatever it is, like I've not got that right.
Yeah.
And it's just so important to be, to definitely like see it as like an area for exploration, for invitation, for possibility,
Yeah.
for fun, like to
Fun.
bring it back
Yeah.
to that space again of like pleasure and fun.
Yeah.
um
And connection, with self, with
yes.
other. And it's interesting because I teach self-pleasure, and I find a lot of women are, the biggest hurdle is like, oh, I just can't find time, or when I come to this point where I'm like, oh, you know, I'm going to self pleasure tonight. By the time I come to it, I'm exhausted and whatever. And it's like, maybe what you're doing isn't that pleasurable.
Yes.
Because if we broke it down, I think it's because we have this idea of like, right, I've got to make my body orgasm. And that can feel like a real chore, right?
Yeah.
But if we can take the focus off that, and it's like, what if you just did something that felt pleasurable, switched off all the noise around what pleasure means to everyone else, and work out what would feel pleasurable for you, and start there, you know?
And it's like that can be so uncomfortable when you're used to such an attached notion of like what sexual pleasure looks like.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then it's like rediscovering what that looks like and feels like to you.
Yeah. And like, again, something else that always comes up is like this sort of like deservedness. Do I deserve just to have an evening of pleasure without any real reason, you know?
When clients come to you or when women come to you, what is it like to be in a space of maybe dissociation or disconnectedness? What might that look like? Because, and again, it's not, I'm not asking the question so that people feel bad, but it's that thing of like how, like it's again like being aware, because I think a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of um like how do you know if you're disconnected from yourself in that way, because you can just be in like a stuck way of doing things for a start
Yeah.
and not
Yeah.
know anything else, right? So yeah, could you speak into that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I kind of want to separate disconnection from disassociation, because my understanding, or the way I'm going to explain it, is disassociation is going to something that will happen in the moment where you start, something's happening, an outside stimulus or external stimulus is stimulating something internally, and it's causing you to kind of leave the body, right? So that's what I describe disassociation. But just come back to disconnection from the body. I mean, on the wider scale, I would say like not too in tune with your emotions, right? That's a good way to, like, the body is the place where you're going to be feeling feelings, right? And you know, collectively we don't really value feeling our feelings. We actually value not feeling our feelings,
Yes.
unless they're good, right?
Yes.
So we
Yeah.
will put lots of things in place, even in the personal development world. We'll do a lot of things to stop ourselves from feeling anything that isn't good, right? You know, we're not really, even beyond that, we kind of live in a world that values intellect. So it can be useful when understanding this question and what disconnect means, to understand the opposite, right? So if we're disconnected from our bodies, we'll probably be quite strongly attached to the mind and the thoughts. And so if you go in to try and feel your feelings, you might find that your thoughts start racing, right? Because what's happening is that your mind is trying to disconnect by staying in the thought process and not going into the felt sense. Because the body is a ball of energy, right? It's always kind of vibrating and flickering. And when we go into like what's called like somatic practice, it's tracking all that sensation that's happening in the body, and connecting to that is connecting to your body and yourself.
Yes.
And so disconnecting is being overly focused in the mind, potentially avoiding emotions, or not taking time to sit down with them, maybe pushing them down. I mean, we do this all, you know, there's various scales of all of this, right? Where nobody's gonna have the capacity to be with their emotions all the time in every given moment, because we've got, and be in their body in every given moment, because we've got other things to do. And the head is a valuable place too, right? They're both are valuable places, right? But if we want to kind of experience ourselves sexually and in pleasure, that happens through the body. Although the mind can trigger with our thoughts and our fantasies, the experience happens through the body. So we want to be able to connect to that. And so being disconnected would be you know, if you could just ask yourself right now, like, what are you feeling in your body? And if that doesn't come out clearly to you, or that's not something that you would even know where to start, there can be just a space of exploration there. How would you describe to someone what it's like to be you in your body?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
that's a really good way of, like, you know, and I would invite, if anyone wants to do it, like closing your eyes and going in and placing your awareness down in the body and just noticing, almost scanning the body and noticing anything that's moving or tingling, or you may even feel an impulse to open your eyes or pick up your phone. I just invite you to find, just to not ignore the urge, but just find the impulse in the body that's wanting you to do that. And just breathe with it. And so this is just a really great way to begin building that relationship and that connection with the body. You know, it's like a meditation in that sense, and you know, it's likely that you'll start to notice when the mind starts to run its stories and its lists and its to-dos and things like that, and just coming back to that felt sense in the body. And then there's, you know, like being uninhibited in the body. We kind of use our body a bit robotic, a bit like a cage. You know, it's got its very well trodden ways of moving and existing in the world, right? We walk, it's very wonderful, very polite, very socialized. We may go to the gym, we do like known exercises that, you know, it's all very acceptable. What about just like going wildly freely dancing in the living room, like, you know, like letting all of that tension and all of that, like,
Or in the gym.
yeah,
Sometimes I like to just cause a disruptive circuit to,
I love that.
you know, like the normality that you see, and I just start doing like some like shaking or
Yeah,
shaking or
amazing.
something, or like the Running Man, or I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's great. I love it.
Because it's that thing of like everybody's just kind of walking around like, I don't know, just so
Yeah.
uncomfortable or something. I don't know. Just like
Yeah, like
don't
in
look
just
at
like
that
in a, yeah,
person.
we've got a
Like
few poses that we can do. It's like Barbie Ken dolls.
yeah.
Like, just do this. But we can't just like go wild and let our whole body just, and you know, and I speak to this, and I want to kind of draw the link between sort of sex and orgasmic energy, because for orgasmic energy to really flow through the body has to feel like safe enough just to kind of like let it all just explode in the body, right? And if we are kind of like, you know, don't feel comfortable with letting our body free and loose, it can restrict our experience of pleasure and sexual energy
Yes.
and life force,
Yeah.
aliveness, you
I mean,
know.
this must come into it so much, just, you know, how people feel about their bodies.
Yeah,
How
it's
comfortable you are, you know, with yourself in your own body, let alone if there's somebody else involved.
yeah, exactly. You know, one of my favorite practices I would advise everyone to do would be to go find a beach, or whenever you're at the beach, find either a secluded spot or go to a nudist bit, or you could even just, you know, do it with a bikini on, but just have that real, like, strip your clothes off and just run screaming into the water and splash in, you know. It's just like this wildly liberating feeling of being in your body, in a way that is like uninhibited but safe for you. So it's got to feel safe, like, so, you know, really assess that for you. You've got to feel like you're not going to be goggle-eyed, people aren't going to be sort of watching you in a certain way, and let go of this feeling that it's unsafe for people to be sort of just like, whoa, what's she doing? I just mean like there's no predatory energy around you.
Yes.
You know, don't worry about what people are thinking about you. Gosh, could you imagine, like, if we just yeah, let that go now, but just, yeah, just feel that kind of fully liberated. I invite you to open up your voice. That's another huge part around opening up ourselves sexually. It's like open up the voice box particularly in female bodies, the throat and the womb and the female genitalia are anatomically very similar. There's this big connection between the throat and the vagina. And there's also a big correlation between like the suppression of women's voices and their sexuality. So there's just this real energy release that comes from just like
Yes.
running into
So
the sea.
if you practice using your voice on a day-to-day basis and you practice like, I don't know, singing or speaking your truth or saying what it is you need to say or whatever it is, does that have a natural knock-on effect in terms of that connection?
Absolutely. And I'd say vice versa, right?
Mm,
The more kind of like we de-shame sex and the more comfortable you become with your sexual energy and aliveness, the more confident and vocal you're going to become.
yes.
Really invite some sounds that are untamed. So
Yes.
speaking our truth, I'm sure, we'll actually speak very eloquently. I'd really invite just, without harming anyone,
Yeah.
letting your voice go through, like letting things be said, that aren't very neat and well
Yeah.
delivered and eloquent, and like letting, or even kind of growling and making
Mm,
some animal noises. And when I say
yeah.
animal noises, the one that comes to me is growling. But I did a workshop once where we kind of moved into embodying the predator and the prey in the animal world. So like
Mm,
chirpy noises or bird noises, or
yeah.
just let your voice explore different sounds, because the
Mm,
more comfortable we can get with how our voice sounds as well, it kind of there's a power in being like,
yes.
because we can be very like, oh, I'll speak out, but as long as I can say the right words at the right
Oh
time,
yeah.
and then
Yeah.
I did
It's
it,
got
and
to
now I,
be said in this
yeah,
way, otherwise it's gonna offend
yeah,
people, or it's got to be neat and eloquent,
yeah.
like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, whereas I think there's something really empowering, like people have less of a hold over you. Not that anyone actually has a hold over you, but we believe other people's judgments have a hold over us. And if you
Mm,
can get a bit like comfortable with your own sort of messy untamedness,
mm.
there's nothing, you can become quite unstoppable.
You know, if as part of that sexual intimacy, if you don't use your voice, is that linked to something? Is that linked to some suppression? Again, like, I think we've got to be so careful not to make something a bad thing,
Yeah.
you know? But
Yeah. And
yeah, just curious.
there's caution not to make it a bad thing, and not to write people's experience as well. So
Yes.
some people may really resonate with it, some people may not. I mean, something that comes up when we speak about this as well is like how expressive we can be in intimacy around pleasure and what we like and what our needs and our desires are, and being able to be vocal in that way. Because
Mm.
often I find um the not saying anything comes with the sexual suppression as well.
Yes.
It's like I
Yeah.
almost want to kind of curl my shoulders in. There's a shutdown on the throat. There's a shutdown around the hips and the pelvis. Um,
Mm.
whereas if we can, and also there's a safety if we can open up our sex center, like we were speaking at the beginning, actually, when our energies
Mm.
are open, but
Mm-hmm.
we've found our voice, and we can tell people no when we want them back. We kind of like create this protection for our energy as well,
Yes.
the space for it to open.
Again, like in the spiritual space, you've just got to be so mindful of like the stories you can tell yourself from looking at what other people are saying, because there is a bit of a narrative around if you are vocal sexually, or if you are really sensually or sexually expressive on Instagram or whatever, right? That you are that it means something. Do you know what I
Mm,
mean? That it means like either good or bad,
yeah,
but that it means then that if you're not like that, that you're less free.
yeah, yeah.
And it's just that bit, I think, like it's just so important to be mindful, because you can be telling yourself these, you can be shaming yourself essentially, can't you, without even realizing it.
We've got to be mindful of where we're looking outside of ourselves, really. Like taking,
Yes.
when we're just speaking here about sound, find what sound feels, what kind of texture of your voice you want to relate to,
Mm.
or feels good for you. And this sort of like, particularly speaking to this sort of showing up on Instagram, you know, our sexuality gets to belong to us.
Yes,
Like
absolutely.
your sexuality, and those who listen, gets to belong to you. Like it doesn't have to look like anyone else's,
Mm.
right? It doesn't have to, yeah, I've even seen, those that are doing this work and they consider themselves asexual. And I'm like, this is, so important to know that. Like, it's so
Mm.
important to have these different representations of what it means to be sexual, but also to know that you can find your own, and there's no
Yeah.
one way of doing things. There's definitely this sort of boom of women wanting to kind of get naked on
Yeah, which
Instagram
is
and like,
beautiful. I love it.
yeah, but that's only one expression, right? It's only one
Yes.
way of doing
Yeah,
things.
exactly. And
Yeah, I
yeah, this I always think there's something beautiful and dismissed often about the quieter voice,
mm,
about the more gentle presence,
yeah,
and that you've got to be like out there with your voice or whatever it is. You can have like such a beautiful, gentle yet powerful presence
yeah.
in your energy, when you're owning who you are, when you're owning your sexual energy or whatever it is, right? Owning your energy in like the ceremony of life. If
Mm,
you're owning that, you don't your energy speaks, doesn't it?
yeah.
In that grounded sense of who you are, and you can be gentle, speak with a quieter voice or whatever it might be, and still command
Yes.
like that attention or magnetism without having to do anything other than own yourself.
Yes, yeah, and it makes me think of like, and it's something that I've been returning to. When I started, it was this sort of like softness that I was leaning into.
Mm,
This, and then I kind of went deeper into this sort of like darker feminine energies, and
yeah.
and that felt really good. And then this return to, yeah, like a softness and just a power in being soft in this world, right?
Yes.
And a subtlety. And I even get this sense, I know we're speaking about the voice, but of, yeah, not needing to say anything and still being,
Mm,
you know in your power, right?
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes
Absolutely.
that's the most powerful thing, is not speaking,
Mm,
not saying things, not
mm.
giving your voice away.
If people are holding that sense of shame, like, I'm sure that a lot of the narratives are around, like, I'll give some examples. Um, my partner's not interested in me. These are the
Mm,
things I hear regularly as well. My partner's not interested in me. I'm not into it. I just I'm just lost that interest. Um, so therefore, in both situations, what is wrong with me? Have you got any like tips or pointers as to where to start with yourself, around that?
my tip is to start to very gently just pull your energy inward and start to connect to your body, to your system, right? I can imagine
Mm,
if those things are coming up and that shame is coming up, it can almost create a lot of outward energy or action or things to kind of like not feel it or to avoid. Like, maybe you are having kind of endurance sex, or uh
mm,
avoiding certain places and times of the day, and like maybe just have that conversation present, sit with your partner if it feels doable, and go on this journey where I really invite couples to rewrite what sex and intimacy means within the scope of their boundaries at that moment. So often it might be like taking off, like for heterosexual couples, taking off penis in the vagina sex for a moment, whilst you could just take that out breath
Yes.
and come back to yourself and just start to really just connect to your body. I even building on that sort of softness, like a really gentle, like yoga flow that you can make your own, really just that practice of connecting to what you're feeling, noticing shame in your body, and then start to explore intimacy from the place of the body and notice where you start to feel a bit disconnected and maybe not open to going deeper in sexual intimacy, and put some boundaries there, right? The body loves boundaries because it starts to feel safe,
Yes.
right? So it's a rewriting of sex and intimacy for couples, which I think is so necessary, and it can feel
Yeah.
like a drawback and a step back, but it's actually just a widening of what's available, or deepening of what's available.
And it's also that return to what actual intimacy that person wants to feel. So if
Yeah.
you stripped it right back, it might be like nothing to do with the bedroom and everything to do with, I just want to spend some time on a date with you.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I just want you to like hold me when I'm doing the washing up. Like put your arms around me, you know?
Yeah.
Whatever it might be, right? Either way, whoever's doing the washing up.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, just the simplicity of that, because that's often what is, I don't know, forgotten, and it's like those moments are the most, like, just so beautiful,
Mm.
and that they're often the simple moments that bring you back into intimacy.
On a similar vein, often what intimacy is, or what's needed, is this sort of like the desire to be seen and heard, right? In our
Yes.
busy, the overwhelming amount of women that say to me when I work with them, or when we break it down and we're like, what do you like in the bedroom? And they say, an emotional connection and safety. And that is what turns them on, or that is what makes them feel more open
Yes.
to sex, or
Yeah.
sexual connection. And I think, particularly couples that have been together for a longer time can be very in their own world, and here. So I'm doing, for those who are listening, I'm kind of like, one hand is in the air and one end, and one hand is
Yeah.
in the other end. So they're both sort of in their heads, in their own lives, sort of disconnected, but not in a way that's negative or positive, just getting on with life. And then there's this idea that you suddenly have to, right, you've got this one evening, and you have to go to
Yeah.
the deepest level of intimacy together,
It's
when you've
like
been
a,
like the most
yes.
furthest
Yeah.
apart, right? And it's like, ugh. But we're not, but I've been, sorting out the kids and getting things, getting people ready for our holiday, and I've been getting my deadlines done at work, and I've been getting the car fixed and MOT, and now all of a sudden my body's just got to be cracked open for sex, and
Yeah.
it's like,
it's
and
it's
we've got
ridiculous.
yeah, we've got 45 minutes. Like, how am I supposed to get to that depth, right? Because arousal deepens, and it's not that simple. If you just keep rubbing this part for long enough, we'll get
Yeah. Yes.
that. Or that
Yeah.
doesn't feel enjoyable. Like, no wonder everyone's sort of avoiding that, because it's like, oh, I don't want to
Yes.
just keep.
It really is reconstructing a new, yeah,
Yeah.
a new narrative, like you said, rewriting the story. I love that. Oh, amazing. I've just absolutely loved this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thanks
And
for having me.
yeah, I feel like we could go so much more into so many, like, so many topics. So yeah, I'm sure that I'll be having more conversations with you for
Oh,
sure
I
in the
would love
future.
that.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Amy.